What's up YouTube, Saf here on Super Saf TV, and in this video I'm going to be comparing the specs of the Samsung Galaxy Note 8.0 to the iPad mini. Now the Samsung Galaxy Note 8.0 just been announced today, and it sits in the competitive market of the 7 to 8 inch form factor of tablets, which also includes the Nexus 7. So I'll be running through the specs of the iPad mini to the Samsung Galaxy Note 8.0 to give you guys a better idea of the differences between these two devices. So let's begin with the screen size and form factor. The screen size of the iPad mini 7.9 inches, the Note 8.0 obviously 8 inches. The resolution of the iPad mini 1024 by 768, whereas the Note 8.0 1280 by 800. Now in terms of the aspect ratio, the iPad mini is 4:3, whereas the Note 8.0 is 16:10. So obviously videos, generally HD videos, are 16:9 in ratio. So on the Note 8.0 they're going to look a bit better because you're going to get less of that black bar at the top and bottom, whereas because the iPad mini is a 4:3 ratio screen, you're going to get a bit more thicker black bars at the top and bottom. Now in terms of PPI, the iPad mini 162 PPI, whereas the Note 8.0 189 PPI, so it's got a higher pixels per inch density on the Note 8.0, only slightly. I mean, it's only less than 30 pixels per inch, so not a huge deal. I don't think you'll visually see a massive difference on there. I mean, the Nexus 7 has a 216 PPI display, so on the Nexus 7 you're probably going to see a bit more of a difference compared to these two devices, but not a huge deal of difference between these two. Obviously the iPad mini, the biggest disappointment is the fact that it doesn't have a Retina display, something which iPad's really big on in terms of their other devices. Let's move on to dimensions. The iPad mini is smaller both in terms of height and width, and it's also slightly thinner than the Note 8.0, and the Note 8.0 has a little bit more of a thicker bevel around the edges of the screen compared to the iPad mini. Now weight wise, the iPad mini 308 grams, whereas the Note 8.0 338 grams. So the iPad mini is roughly about 30 grams lighter. So again, in terms of the size and the weight, it's going to be a bit more compact than the Note 8.0. Now let's look at what's inside these devices. The iPad mini has a dual-core A5 1 GHz processor, whereas the Note 8.0 has a quad-core 1.6 GHz processor. So the Note 8.0 has a faster processor in terms of the fact that it's quad-core instead of the dual-core, as well as a higher clock speed of 1.6 GHz. Now obviously the processor is going to depend on the operating system and how well it works with that. So you'd have to see hands-on in terms of how quickly it opens apps, etc. But generally speaking, in terms of the specs, the Note 8.0 has a much faster processor. Now even looking at RAM, the iPad mini 512 megabytes of RAM, whereas the Note 8.0 2 gigabytes of RAM. So you've got a lot more RAM on the Note 8.0, and that's going to be especially useful for things like multitasking. Obviously the Note 8.0 also has a multi-window function, so you can have two apps open at the same time, which is a really unique feature, and the RAM is really going to help with this, running both of those apps at the same time. Internal memory, the iPad has the 16, 32 and 64 gigabyte variants, the Note 8.0 16 and 32 gigabyte variants. However, the Note 8.0 does have expandable storage, micro SD up to 64 gigabytes. Obviously the iPad mini does not have expandable storage as with the other Apple devices. So the Note 8.0, say for instance you go for the 16 gigabyte version and you get a 64 gigabyte SD card, which is very cheap these days, you're going to be able to have more storage than the highest iPad mini version of 64 gigabytes. So that's a very useful feature here. So you are going to have that option to expand. You're not stuck with what you've got. In terms of wireless and mobile data, both have Wi-Fi and cellular options, 3G and 4G. However, the Note 8.0 does have the option of 3G phone calls if you go for the data version. So I mean, obviously you're probably not going to be holding that to your face, the 8-inch screen, but that's an option there. Obviously with the hands-free kit, it's going to be another useful feature on here. Rear camera, both have a 5 megapixel camera with 1080p recording, HD video recording, and the front camera is 1.2 megapixels for the iPad mini. The Samsung Galaxy Note 8.0 has a 1.3 megapixel front-facing camera. Now both of these are capable of filming 720p HD video as well, so pretty similar there as well. Now in terms of the connector, the iPad mini lightning connector, same as the iPhone 5. So some of your older sort of cables and things, if you've got some older Apple devices, are not going to work with this new one. You are going to have to get adapters or new cables. The Note 8.0 micro USB, obviously a universal format. It's going to work with your other Samsung devices as well as other Android devices. generally, because the micro USB connector is a lot more universal. Now, NFC connectivity, neither of these have NFC connectivity. The Note 8.0, so things like S-Beam are not going to work on here. Again, not a big deal on tablets, I think, anyway, but neither of these have NFC. Now, this is one key point of the Samsung Galaxy Note 8.0. You've got the S Pen feature, which is the pen input, not something that a lot of other devices do not have. So you can use it either with your standard touch, but you've also got the pen feature, which is going to be really good for making quick notes and also, you know, drawing and things like that. It's going to be really useful. And the pen also now works with the menu buttons at the bottom, which wasn't the case in previous Note devices. So again, very useful there. The iPad mini, obviously, as with other tablets, does not offer this, so that's a key advantage that the Samsung Galaxy Note 8.0 does have. The Samsung Galaxy Note 8.0 also has an IR port, and that's going to be useful as a smart remote, whereas the iPad mini does not have this. Operating systems, obviously, the iPad mini has the iOS 6, whereas the Note 8.0 comes with Android Jelly Bean 4.1.2 out of the box with the TouchWiz interface, the Samsung popular TouchWiz interface, which is really useful. And you've got some additional features such as the multi-window that I was mentioning earlier on, but the new feature that they've got here is the reading mode. So you can switch on reading mode when you're watching ebooks or reading ebooks, etc. So this is going to adjust the contrast to make the text a little bit more easier on the eye. So for prolonged periods of reading, it's going to be really useful. Obviously, this form factor is really, you know, aiming for that ebook market as well. And for reading these books, it's going to be another useful feature. Now, looking at the battery, the iPad mini, lithium polymer, 4,490 milliamp battery, whereas the Note 8.0 has a lithium ion 4,600 milliamp battery. Now, although the Note 8.0 has a higher capacity battery, both are, you know, sort of claiming around about 10 hours usage, which is pretty standard for a tablet these days, and you'd probably expect roughly about that much anyway. Now, in terms of price, the cheapest iPad mini 16GB version is £269 here in the UK, or in the US $329. The Note 8.0, they've not released any sort of pricing details as yet, so when they do come through, I'll be putting an annotation just here and also in the description with the latest pricing details. So do watch out for those. But I think, in my opinion, it should be roughly about the £300 mark. I mean, the 10.1, the Note 10.1 is £400 or $450. So I'm expecting the Note 8.0 to be roughly around about £300 or around about $350 in the US. That would give it a bit more of a competitive price, or slightly even lower to go head to head with the iPad mini. To summarize, I think both of these are really good tablets and are obviously going to be popular, no doubt. But the iPad mini is smaller and lighter. It's a bit more compact than the Samsung Galaxy Note 8.0. However, the Note 8.0 has the S Pen feature, which is obviously very useful. You've got the pen input as well as higher specs compared to the iPad mini. So it really depends on what's more important to you. Now, what would you go for? Would you go for the iPad mini or would you go for the Samsung Galaxy Note 8.0? Do drop me a comment below and let me know what you think. And obviously, if the Samsung Galaxy 8.0 does come through, we'll have a full hands-on review on the channel as usual. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. It really does help me out. And why not subscribe to the channel? I've got plenty more videos coming up on here. This is Saf on Super Saf TV, and I'll see you next time.